Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schuman. This is our closing episode of Season 4. We're going to focus on a topic that some of you might say, no, that's not really an issue for our organization. Why are you taking the time to discuss it? But I think many others will think this is a subject more important than ever, one that companies and their leaders need to pay close attention to, especially today. I might place the topic in a category of, quote, it can take many years for good things to become reality, at least on a more universal basis. The topic is business ethics. We'll have several comments today from Frank Walker, who has established the Walker Center for Applied Ethics at Marion University. And we are joined by the executive director of that effort. Liz Coit, welcome to the In Chamber.
Thank you, Grant. Great to be here.
All right, Liz, let's start off with the pioneer here, the man who was touting business ethics nearly 3 decades ago as part of his leadership of Walker Information Consulting and Data Firm. In a recent interview, I asked Frank if the reasons had changed on why this is so important for businesses.
No matter your business, whether you're controlled or not, it becomes important to the group that you want to attract, and it's important to the group you want to sell to. It should be important to the owners themselves personally. And I keep coming back to the business side. It will result in more loyal employees. It will result in more loyal customers. So it's smart business. Small and medium-sized businesses still are the beacon in this country as far as the entryway for most people to get into business. I mean, the majority start with smaller companies. There's family businesses. There's what young people learn from those first jobs at the McDonald's or the local grocery store. All that's important.
Liz, I'd say expectations are running high, aren't they, among those groups that Frank mentioned, whether it's employees, customers? How would you categorize today's environment when it comes to businesses not only doing what is right, but what is most ethical?
I think today, it's been an evolution, right? I mean, Frank, you sort of put a pin in the ground 30 years ago and we've evolved, but it's almost like there's now this sort of tidal wave that's hitting us. And a big part of that are these groups, right? The employees and the customers who are in the driver's seat and are demanding more of companies, demanding more of potential employers to not only act right and ethically, but they're changing the definition of what that means. And we need to explore that and understand that more. But this, we sort of all know, right? We're having trouble hiring right now. Well, guess what? That means our employees get to be super picky. And they are. And it's being driven by, this sort of younger generation. I won't say young anymore because the millennials are kind of getting up there, but coming right behind them, right, are those Gen Y, Gen Z, and so forth. And their message is just as strong that you must do more than just do the right thing or just follow the law. And so it's almost a tidal wave that's going to hit us here soon.
We mentioned that Frank's been a leader in this field for so many years. And in the upcoming story in our Biz Voice magazine, he describes his desire to truly make a difference, resulting in this partnership with Marion University. What is it about Frank, his passion, passionate as ever at age 86, that makes this so special?
There are a couple of things. One is the consistency of a corporate leader at bringing this message forward. You can read sort of Frank's writings. You can read the speeches that he's given for the past decade on this topic. Yes, ethics, the definition and the scope has changed, and it's continuing to change and broaden for companies. But at the bottom line, Frank's message is there's no downside to doing the right thing, right? The right thing will always be good business. Now go figure out what that right thing is, right? And we can help you do that. And I think that consistency coming from someone out of the corporate sphere. I mean, I've had, amazing opportunity to work with some incredible corporate leaders over the years. I would say most of whom I would put in the same category, but for them to step forward and sort of put their money where their mouth is and say, no, this is going to be my legacy. This is the message. This is the footprint I want to leave. I think that's pretty special. And Frank is special in many ways, including that one.
Well, on the other end of the scale, Frank explains why Marion has turned into an excellent fit for the Walker Center. Let's hear his comments.
I'm hoping, and I'm still hoping, this will have to be determined, that Marion was a size school that we could relate better to small and medium-sized businesses. With the base of students they have, the size of school they have. So it was a combination of things that I went with Marion. I think we're still in the early stages. I dream that we can take the science of ethics and get it into a workable tool for business. This is where I've always felt. I'll talk just a minute about our own industry, but years ago, some people at General Electric told me, you people, meaning people like Walker, you have the ability to take what the professors are developing, you package it up and you make it understandable to us business people. And I have that same dream that we can take some of the science that comes out of ethics, religion, philosophies, so forth, and package that in a sense or make understandable to business.
So Liz, that sounds like a perfect fit for a university like Marion, that not only on campus with your own students, but in that translation to the business world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the unique thing about just any university being in this space is we can bring some structure to it and some depth of understanding. We have conversations with corporate leaders who say, well, sure, we understand, we kind of have a gut feel for what's right. Well, it's more than that. It needs to be more than that in order to be consistently applied and consistently deliver the positive outcomes that we want. And I think a university in general brings that kind of thought framework formation to the question. Marion in particular, of course, brings a couple of different things. One, we're located dead center right here in Indianapolis, and we're in the community. We have a lot of what we do is to connect into our community, and we're constantly looking for more ways, whether it's in the classroom or outside the classroom. How do we serve our community, which is a big thriving metropolis, right? And we bring sort of our values, right? Which is, yes, we are a Catholic Franciscan university, and faith and action, right? So how do we translate our values through in that faith, into the classroom, into the students, and for the students to then take into the community, and then how do we lift that up to folks who are already in the workplace. So I think that the university was already doing this. And so for us to, sort of take this specific mission of applied ethics it's a very natural fit and on the path of what we're doing. And oh, by the way, yes, we happen to be located right in a thriving business community, which gives us pretty direct access.
Let's dig into the topic a little deeper, Liz. The Walker Center conducted a survey earlier this year of people throughout organizations capturing perceptions of ethical cultures. There was some good news and some not so good news when comparing Indiana to the U.S. What were some of those key survey findings that stood out for you?
The survey went sort of deep dive into all of the different piece parts that make up sort of this, do I have an ethical culture or not? And so in summary, we sort of asked the question, how do you feel about your company? Do you think that your company is acting? And, unfortunately, the answer wasn't great, right? So 56% of employees, and this was across the state, across size of company, across industries, 56% of employees thought that their companies basically had a strong ethical culture. Well, yeah, we'd like that to be a little bit higher. It's about the same. It's a little bit lower than the national, which could, there's some statistical reasons why that could be true. But to have roughly half feel great about their companies, lot of opportunity, there. The other thing, and this is actually sort of good and bad, right? Sort of over half of our respondents reported having experienced or witnessed sort of misbehavior, right? Sort of violation of their company's policies. So why is that good, right? So what's good about it is they're reporting it, right? They're seeing it, they're talking about it. We can't fix it if we don't know about it. The bad news is it's happening. Could that ever go to zero? Yeah, of course not, right? Humans are humans. There's always going to be conflict, but lots of opportunity in there for us to sort of change the answer, right? To lift up the ethics culture of our companies.
Liz, in an earlier conversation we had, you pointed out some pretty dramatic generational differences among respondents and their perceptions about ethics or pressure to do certain things while at work. Can you elaborate a little bit on those?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we look at when we're evaluating ethics culture is, do you feel pressure personally to compromise the ethics or the values of your company? 26% of the respondents overall, so across all employees, said yes, I have felt pressure to compromise the rules or the standards in my company. The interesting thing is, if you look at the employees who are under the age of 35, right? So you pick up that younger generation, which is the majority of our employees today, that number jumped to 46%. And then if you look at the gender split, and you look at men under the age of 35, over 70% of them reported having felt pressure to compromise the ethics of their companies. So what is that, right? Is it that, we're picking on these folks, or is it that they're demanding more, right? Is their standard higher? And their perception of being pressured is, they're putting us to the test. It could be one of both, and obviously we need to explore that further. But what it does say definitively is that there's a generation out there that needs some attention, and we need to understand better how to make them comfortable in their workplace.
Liz, we talked about this survey. I know additional surveys, research taking place as you go about your work, but talk about some of the ways the Walker Center you see helping companies take that next step, helping make business ethics, part of their processes, they're part of their values. What are some ways you see working directly with businesses?
Sure. Well, I think that there are a couple of different ways. I think, first and foremost is to help companies understand what the new playing field is, right? So we went from, you need to follow the law. 30 years ago, I was in banking. Well, I'm not that old, but I was in banking 30 years ago. And, the thing was redlining, right? And that was, we focused heavily on that, right? And how you were serving the underserved population. That is still true today. But now we need to help companies understand it's not just enough to not do bad things, to not offer your products in a biased way. Now you have to reach beyond that. You have to create a culture that makes your employees feel happy. So not only do you have to do the right thing in the exterior world, but now your employees need to feel comfortable, because guess what? They can leave because there are a lot of jobs out there right now. But also we have this recent study, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been around for years and years. But for the first time, it actually prioritizes CEOs in the eye of the public are the most responsible for fixing the ills of the world, right? Healthcare and environment and so forth. And that's because they've lost trust in other voices, government, media, and so forth. So what can we do? We can help them understand that, understand how they can play in that world. So that's probably at the highest level, specifically helping them understand what is your starting point in terms of your employees. How do they feel about the things that create culture, an ethical culture? Because an ethical culture, and we can show them study after study, leads to better long-term business performance, and that is tangible, right? So what can we do? Where are the gaps in your organization? Is it in training? Is it in messaging? Is it consistency of how you're monitoring and measuring performance? So we can work very specifically either at the industry or at the company level with some of the tools that we have to help them understand that. I think there's our starting point where we're focused right now is education, is really getting information in the hands of business leaders so that they can begin to digest this big nut called ethics culture and understand where it needs to fit in terms of their strategic plan, their vision and mission, and then we can help them work on it with some of the tools that we have.
All right, Liz, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to have you describe an ethical dilemma a little bit, maybe for the listeners, and maybe give them a path on what might be the most ethical route. Because Frank mentioned it many years ago in a story we did, and you cited a little bit earlier. It's not choosing between what is right and wrong. That's a fairly easy choice if you think about it, but it's a little more complex when it's choosing between what's right and right. So can you give an example of an ethical dilemma that
Sure.
companies might typically face, and how that one right choice would be more
Yeah, I mean,
ethical?
you know, how typical. Let me use one that I won't use names, but folks who read the newspaper will recognize it. So I have a coffee shop, right? And I have two people who come into my coffee shop and buy a cup of coffee. It's pouring rain outside, buy a cup of coffee, and they sit down at the table. There are lots of other people who'd like to sit at that table, right? At what point do I, as the manager of that establishment, ask these people to leave? And under what conditions do I ask them to leave? So, right? So as the company, I could say, well, I got to serve other people and so forth. But the ethical lens might say, right? Well, I'm going to put these people out, into the rain, right? It's a sort of a very complex thing, right? And if you are thinking narrowly about, I need to fill that table because I've got somebody waiting for that table and I'm being measured on how many cups of coffee I'm selling, then I'm going to ask them to leave. Now, if anybody remembers the actual story, police were involved in the eviction of these two gentlemen who turned out to be homeless, but that's not the specifics. But then the question becomes, but if I'm the company, how do I feel about the story that hit the newspaper the next morning about how I kicked two homeless people out because I didn't take the moment to find out that in fact they were homeless? They had come to enjoy this cup of coffee that they only had the $2.50 to buy. And now I put them back out in the rain. So I think in the, sort of the backlash is a reflection of what we expect of our companies today, which is it's not just about you doing the right thing for your business. And can I understand that policy you might have to say you only get 20 minutes at my table? Sure. But am I going to hold you accountable to the community that you serve, which included it turned out to be these two homeless people. And I think that what we're seeing is people are demanding that bigger social responsibility from our companies. It's not just about being corporate responsible at the corporate level. It's about being socially responsible in the community that they serve.
And that's increased significantly, hasn't it, in the past 15 months, 17 months, whatever time frame we want to use?
Yeah, it's sort of incredible, and you can use a lot of different ways to measure it. But for those of us, who started our world in the business world, we follow the money. If you look at what's happened in the institutional investing community, right, which is all the mutual funds and so forth, the shift in dollars and in those funds focus on the social aspect of a company. So there's sort of the two columns. Now I'm going to measure you on your traditional performance metrics, but now before I'm going to recommend you in my fund, I'm also going to look at, sort of whether it's the environmental social governance, right? The ESG parameters, your impact parameters, whatever it might be. And you're going to get into my fund only if you meet certain standards there as well. And so the shift, I want to say, it depends on sort of who your source is, but it can be as much as 40% of the institutional investing dollars, which is trillions of dollars, have now added this whole set of criteria around social impact.
I think you mentioned the number and when we talked for BizVoice of $19 trillion in this ESG investing space.
Got 19 trillion in impact in institutional investing dollars that it's in some way is requiring a broader lens on how they assess the company. Mm-hmm.
So in the opening comment we played from Frank, he mentioned that desire, that need to reach small and medium-sized businesses. The large companies that they can and they really must have personnel dedicated to this for various reasons, the regulatory responsibilities, working internationally. But what's the key for smaller companies, with those that might have fewer resources? What are some of the first steps they can take to ensure they're operating as ethically as possible?
Yeah, and it's as you say, it's more difficult. The research that we are doing, and we have a couple of different sources now and are still sort of playing with it, but it looks like the cut is about 100 employees, roughly there. If you have more than 100 employees, somewhere in the 2/3 to 3/4 of those organizations have what they would consider to be a formal approach to ethics and compliance, right? Whether that's a dedicated person or a department. And of course, the bigger the company, the more likely it is a department. But if you get under 100, it was something like 1/4 of those companies are saying they have anything formal. And that's because they're resource constrained, right? So I would say the first is one, to recognize that it's not going to happen organically. Maybe it is if I'm a sole proprietor or I have 1 or 2 people and I can control every minute of every day of how they act, and I am personally 100% ethical, right? But the minute you start to have people in your organization, 3, 4 people out doing things, now you need to get a little bit more formal about it. Whether that's starting with a formal statement of your ethics policy, your policies and procedures, whether that is a place to report or even just talk about some of these gray areas and how the company wants us to work through it, but beginning to put some formality to how we address ethics in our company can be quite, that's hopefully not too difficult. The CEO, the owner, board members, they're going to have to wear multiple hats. There's no question about that in the small, especially in the smaller companies, but they're going to have to make it a priority starting with the board to say, all right, what is our policy? How are we going to hold you accountable? How are we going to monitor and measure that? And how can your organization, basically take this on, this mantle of managing the ethics culture until we're big enough to have somebody devoted to doing it all day long. But I think that's when Frank says, we need to focus there. I think it's because they need more tools. And can we, at the Walker Center, can we take what we know and what our partners at some of the big guys are doing, and can we package it in a way that gives them some easy tools to start to put some of the framework in place in their organization, so that it's a little more than just gut feel and organic, that there is some formality to it, that there's a clear message and clear priority on ethics in their companies.
I want to play another comment from Frank, and this goes beyond the relevance to just individual businesses, but really focuses on the larger community as a whole.
I personally think that what we're doing here can have a huge impact on keeping the free enterprise system. I do worry about that. I see that data that suggests that over half the people in this country work for the government now. If not directly by federal, state, and local government, they indirectly work there through state schools, through hospital, various, the number of employees that, and I will tell you that I am concerned because when government runs things, I don't think they're as efficient, and it becomes political. Business gets criticized. Well, they make money. Well, they also can get put out of business next week. And they're not guaranteed to be here. So because of that, if they do wrong, they can go away. So I really hope that what we're doing here could have an impact. I get so tired of the stories about the bad business people. I had the chance one time years back when the Watergate was hot, and Ed Bradley, the editor of the Washington paper with the Watergate and all that, came to Indiana, and there were a handful of us from the state or city chamber. We spent an afternoon with him, and they said to him, why is all the news negative, and why is everything bad? I loved his answer, and he looked at us and he says, "We do not report on safe plane landings," and so that kind of set the thing. So I realized that they talk about bad business people. We need people to hear more about good business people.
Well, that's a great summary from Frank there. It covers a wide variety of areas. Liz, the question I'll ask you, what do you think are some of the factors that keep businesses from making the best ethical decisions?
I think it's, first and foremost, pressure to perform, right? It's this sort of historical belief, and we were all part of it, right? That we're accountable to the shareholder, and I think again that's pretty straightforward, right? In the best companies, I worked for Citigroup for years, right? We had no question about how to know whether we were making the shareholders happy or not, and every initiative was evaluated on that basis. But now you're changing the metrics to say it's not good enough to just keep your shareholders happy. Now I am expecting you to do more. And, to Frank's point a bit, right, to the extent that we have lost faith or lose faith at any point in time or over time in government to step up and take care of these sort of social faults that exist, then we look to companies to do it. So all of a sudden now, don't just keep your shareholder happy. Now you've got to look more broadly and do that. So I think it's complicated. I also think that bad news always drowns out, right? So, there are all kinds of examples, Volkswagen and others, right, who do great things and then something goes wrong and all of a sudden we've forgotten all the great things that they do. So there's this sort of PR sort of problem that we have, which is, how do we create this consistently? We have some in our local community, which you just, you think of when you think ethics and ethics culture and so forth. I think of Eli Lilly, and I'll just put it right out there, but, they trip. We all trip, right? And so I think it's keeping in context that it is very complex, that any company, can trip. The question is, do they do it consistently? Do they do it intentionally, or are they intentionally seeking integrity? And can we see evidence of that? And I think, that people like Calvert Investment and other of the big guys doing the impact investing, driving the impact investing world, that is what they do, right? They come up with formulas and metrics and, and structures to evaluate companies for their intent and hopefully ultimately their performance, understanding that if in fact there is consistent clarity in their prioritization of ethics and their approach to assuring it, that in the long run, on average, they will outperform those who don't have that. So it's complicated, one, because it's hard to evaluate, and two, because we're in this transition of some who get it and are trying, and those who don't yet get it. And you could probably point to industries, and we can certainly see that in some of the data that we have here in Indiana. Some industries are just a little more forward thinking on this topic, and a little more down the road towards where they need to be in their ethics culture than other industries. And then obviously company to company, you'll see some variation. And so I think it's, one, it's a matter of sort of waking up as a CEO and realizing this has to be a priority, and then reaching out for the tools.
Yeah, and Liz, as Frank mentioned, also as far as media coverage goes, sometimes that one trip that might happen gets overplayed or overshadows a lot of many good, right, ethical decisions that are made. So having worked in the newspaper industry for the first 12 or 13 years of my career, I understand how that works. And so, yeah, that's another factor at play. As we get ready to wrap up, when we talked earlier, you mentioned that Frank wanted and still wants to take on the world when it comes to business ethics. You won't be surprised to know that he admitted that to me a couple days later after I talked to you. He used the exact same phrase, but he went on to say that starting in Indiana, making a difference here really fits well with Midwestern values, the Hoosier work ethic. Long term, in your view, what do you envision as success for the Walker Center?
So I think, where we are now is Indiana's our model. Right. I mean, it's close to home, so it's more than, it's a sort of a work of love right here. But Indiana should be a microcosm, right? We should be able to look at Indiana. We roughly sort of mirror. We have some differences by industry, presence of the unions and so forth and so on, which are factors. Strong educational component, huge healthcare component. So can we take Indiana and create sort of measurable difference? Can we lift up the ethics culture in measurable ways as a model, right? And then as the Walker Center, can we take the learning from that, take that model and share it, whether it's state by state or on a national level? We certainly have companies here that are part of Business Ethics Indiana, which is part of, we work with them quite closely, who are multinationals, right? And so, there's a lot of learning about ethics culture in a multinational. But so what can we do here as we're working diligently to support the ethics culture in Indiana, we're also extrapolating the learning from that so that we can share it. And that's something that we as a university can do quite easily, is because we have a voice in that for the nationally international playing field, but sort of one step at a time. It's always my to Frank, we'll get there, we'll do the world, but first let's do Indiana, because the rest of them could just copy us if we get there. And to our knowledge, I mean, there are efforts in other states, but nothing on the order of magnitude of what we're trying to do here in Indiana.
Well, we can shine that spotlight on Indiana as the positive example, as a leader in this. What a great thing that'll be, not only for the state, but really far beyond.
Absolutely.
Well, Liz, thanks so much for joining us today, sharing your insights, and obviously we thank Frank Walker for his leadership, his dedication, and continued efforts in this area. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It's takes a village, so we really appreciate working with you.
Well, I've referenced the Biz Voice magazine story a couple times. That'll appear in our August issue. We'll go even more in depth on the topic. We also have a video commentary on the importance of business ethics that has been running on Inside Indiana Business Television and is available through our Indiana Chamber social media and video efforts. The Walker Center will be back in the November Biz Voice with a column, an update on programs and initiatives that will be taking place. As mentioned in our last episode, this is my final turn behind the microphone for the In Chamber, as I'm retiring after 23 years with this wonderful organization. It's been a pleasure to bring you more than 100 conversations over the last 4 years. Those conversations will continue with members of the Chamber Communications team hosting, and Tony Spatero continuing to provide the technical expertise to bring it all together. Stay tuned for season 5 of the In Chamber, and thanks as always for listening.